Oftentimes I get asked what my favorite books versus movies review was. For the record, it's Roger Rabbit, but rarely do I get asked what my least favorite was, and this has a pretty easy answer as well, because there's one books versus movies review that I probably should never have done. My fourth books versus movies review compared Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory with the 1971 movie starring Gene Wilder. This isn't my least favorite books versus movies review, by the way. The movie was one of my favorites growing up, so naturally I wanted to do the comparison. I also felt it necessary to compare the book to the 2005 Tim Burton movie starring Johnny Depp because it did have a number of good points as well. The problem was, while I knew that the Gene Wilder movie would easily beat the book, I also knew that the 2005 movie would not, so I decided to do them both separately. This, I now acknowledge, was a mistake. I know that a lot of people enjoyed it, but looking back, I can tell that my heart really wasn't in that particular review. And the main reason for that is I had essentially done that review already, just with a different movie, so I was just revisiting the same points I'd made before, and who'd want to do that, right? Wait. So I made fun of the movie a little bit more than I normally would have, glossing over some of the good points that the movie does have to offer. Looking back on it now, I wish that I had compared both movies to the book at once and allowed it to have two different results. So that's basically what I'm doing now. And again, the original results will not change. I'm not going to be deducting a point from books because I didn't like the original review. The review is done, and it's going to stand as is. But just for the record, let's see how I would have done it differently. So now you get two books versus movies reviews for the price of one. Books versus movies review of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. We'll start as we did before with our main title character, Charlie Bucket. We get three distinct versions of this character. In the previous reviews, they were ranked with the 71 movie Charlie as the best, then book Charlie, then the 2005 movie Charlie. My opinion of the 1971 Charlie really has not changed that much. I really do think that he is the best Charlie Bucket, simply because he seems the most authentically childlike to me, and also because he's the one that actually develops throughout the story. The thing about book Charlie is that he doesn't really grow at all. He's a good kid at the beginning of the story, and he's pretty much the same good kid at the end of the story. And 1971 movie Charlie is too, but the difference is he is a better kid at the end of the story. 2005 movie Charlie doesn't really develop much either because the movie isn't telling his story, it's telling Wonka's story. So Charlie is likewise a good kid at the beginning and a good kid at the end. Now, I was maybe a little unfair to this version of the character last time, so let me rectify that. This version of the character is definitely a lot closer to his book counterpart, but he's also a lot more active. Both of them basically win the contest by default because the other kids are so rotten that they, for whatever reason, dropped out and Charlie was the only one left, but at least in the 2005 movie we get to see Charlie a little bit more. And he is actually active in helping Wonka find and reconcile with his father, and he's very loyal to his family and very passionate about helping them. And I guess you could argue that he does grow a little bit. In the scene I made a fuss over where he basically crushes Grandpa Joe's hopes and dreams and Grandpa George tells him off for it, you could argue that he does learn about things that are more valuable than money and that this helps him later when dealing with Wonka. That being said though, that scene still ticks me off, and it does kind of rub me the wrong way how this kid never seems to do anything wrong. And I'm not just talking about being bad, I'm talking about being a kid. Kids mess up. They're still learning, still growing, still figuring out how to think of others before themselves. Kids aren't born just being good kids, they have to grow that way, which is why it's important to illustrate growth in child characters. Which is why, ultimately, I still think that the 1971 movie Charlie is the best Charlie. He's a good kid even if we're not comparing him to the other kids. He loves his family, helps them by getting himself a job, and just seems like an all-around nice guy. But there are still some moments where he thinks only of himself, where he gets selfish or greedy, and where he breaks the rules. And to be perfectly fair, that's also true of book Charlie, at least once. He finds money in the street and wants to get a chocolate bar all for himself without sharing it with anybody. But overall, book Charlie's goodness is a passive goodness. He's good because he doesn't do anything. He's basically good by default. Is there anything wrong with that? No, of course not. It just makes for a really uninteresting character. 1971 Charlie, on the other hand, is actively good. Sometimes he messes up, but in the end he does the right thing and returns the gobstopper, despite the fact that he could have gotten money from Slugworth and the fact that Wonka just blew up at him and denied him his prize for breaking the rules. So 1971 Charlie is still easily the most authentic and developed of the three Charlies. Book Charlie and 2005 Charlie are basically the ideal of what we wish a child would be. But still, even then, their ideal goodness does basically boil down to just stay quiet and do what you're told and you'll be a good kid, whereas 1971 Charlie goes a bit further with that. So 1971 Charlie still beats the book, and book still beats 2005 Charlie. And now we move on to the other title character, or at least as far as the 1971 film title is concerned, Willy Wonka. To be honest, this category is in many ways kind of a no-brainer to me. As far as I'm concerned, Gene Wilder is and always will be Willy Wonka. But to be fair, this is the Willy Wonka I grew up with. It's the first version of the character I ever knew, so I'm probably a little biased towards him. Even looking at it objectively, or as objectively as I possibly can, I still do think this is the best version of the character. And it's for the same reason I think 1971 Charlie is the best version of that character. Gene Wilder's Wonka seems the most authentic, the most like a real person. The book Wonka is authentic to a point, but we really only see the crowd-pleasing side of him. And Johnny Depp, well, we'll get to him in a minute. The thing about Book Wonka is that he's always happy and excited. The only times where he's really not is those brief moments of panic when some kid goes astray. He's thrilled to see every kid, excited about every invitation. He's just always on the same level. As such, not only does he get kind of tiring after a while, but you never really get the sense of his true passion. Gene Wilder, on the other hand, has many levels. Sometimes he's smooth, sometimes he's excited, sometimes he's deadpan, sometimes he's reflective, and at the end he actually gets angry, turning into the sort of shrewd businessman that we would expect to be in charge of a chocolate factory. But when Charlie gives him back the gobstopper and Wonka tells him that he's won, you can tell he's genuinely excited.
You did it! You did it! I knew you would! I just knew you would!
You know that that excitement is genuine, just as you knew that the anger was genuine, because when the other kids went astray, he was perfectly calm.
Stop! Don't! Help! Police! Murder!
She was a bad egg.
Stop! Don't come back!
And then there's Johnny. Dear old Johnny. And again, I picked on him a little bit, maybe unfairly, but my opinion of this character really hasn't changed that much. I just don't know what it is he's trying to do. And I think what his performance boils down to is a difference between childlike and childish. Book Wonka is childlike. He values imagination, has a lot of energy, clearly has a great deal of passion for his work, but he's still an adult. Johnny Depp's Wonka is childish, more like a hyperactive kid in a candy store than someone who actually owns his own candy factory. Someone who's childlike is someone that we can still have respect for and take seriously. And yes, I will admit, Johnny Depp's Wonka is funny, but so is Gene Wilder's Wonka, and when he makes me laugh, I can still take him seriously. I never took Johnny Depp's Wonka seriously, even when I was supposed to. There are some performances when a person can just be ridiculously funny and then turn around in the next scene and make you feel sorry for them. I never got this from Johnny Depp's performance. And I really do think he was trying his darndest not to be Gene Wilder's Wonka, and it does not work. If you still like his version of the character, that's fine. But to me, Gene Wilder is still the king of Wonka, and Johnny Depp is the village idiot. And now on to other characters. Bratty kids, indulgent parents, and a 96-year-old man. Since we've now introduced him, let's look at Grandpa Joe. Much like Charlie, the 2005 Grandpa Joe has more in common with the book character. He's very childlike for his age, he loves Charlie and wants the best for him, and he says yippee a lot. Grandpa Joe in the 1971 movie is a little different. Actually, it's kind of like the childlike, childish difference we talked about with Wonka, only this time it's the other way around. Grandpa Joe in the 1971 movie is definitely more childish. He wants what's best for Charlie, but he's not nearly as responsible in actually taking care of him. Where book Grandpa Joe is trying to lower Charlie's expectations because he knows that there's virtually no chance that he'll actually find a golden ticket, Grandpa Joe in the 1971 movie actually raises them. Also, he's the one who wants to try the fizzy lifting drinks. In a lot of ways, he's like the other indulgent parents in how he treats Charlie during the factory tour. But we love him all the more for it because of the fierce support that he movie shows for Charlie. As for the 2005 movie, I do like the backstory that they give us with Grandpa Joe having once worked for Wonka. That's a nice little connection between the two of them that neither of the other versions did. And I like that the 2005 movie actually gives personalities to the other grandparents, especially Grandpa George, who is kind of that curmudgeon who states the harsh realities that no one wants to acknowledge or talk about. The book grandparents and the 1971 movie grandparents are pretty much the same, with Joe being the favorite. The Oompa Loompas, or the little people who work for Wonka, are given a little bit more backstory in the book and the 2005 movie. And again, the 2005 Oompa Loompas match the book Oompa Loompas more closely when it comes to appearance and personality. I also like the role that the Oompa Loompas play in moving the 2005 movie along. Also, it's pretty cool that they're all played by the same guy. The 1971 Oompa Loompas look a little bit more like something from another world. And they do sing about the morals for each child, but they're a little bit lacking in personality individually, though I guess that's not really the point of the movie. With regards to the parents of the bratty children, both movies made the decision to have just one parent escort the child to the factory and not both. The downside to this is that the book never really gives us an opportunity to get to know the parents. By only focusing on one parent per kid, the movies give us the opportunity to really get to know that parent's personality and parenting style. In both versions, I think that Violence Parent is probably the best, with the 1971 movie giving us a used car salesman who's always ready to seal the deal and sell his daughter's virtues, and the 2005 movie featuring that helicopter soccer mom from hell that we all know who tries to push her daughter into being a winner. The book specifically said that bad parenting was specifically responsible for how Veruca turned out, but the movie shows us how bad parenting is responsible for how all the kids turned out. And I mentioned before how much I love Charlie's mother in the 1971 movie. She's a widowed mother who has to take care of herself, her son, her parents, and her in-laws, and yet still finds time to be a loving and supportive mother and knows best how to raise her child and help him to grow. And that just leaves us with the kids, and again, the 2005 movie follows the book more closely. The 1971 movie focused mostly on Veruca, probably because she was the child actor with the most experience and the most presence. Mike TV also got a lot more screen time in the 1971 movie. Violet never really seemed like that much of a brat to me, and neither did Augustus. Augustus was definitely more of a glutton in the book, and the 2005 movie really establishes his personality well for as little as we see of him. And the book establishes Violet as more of a ditzy airhead, though it still does fixate on the gum-chewing aspect of her character. The feeling that I get reading the book is that Roald Dahl was focusing on the things that irritated him personally. The bratty kid and the kid who eats too much are understandable, and even the kid who watches television all the time is understandable, though Roald Dahl does go a bit overboard with this one, more on that later. But his fixation with gum chewing is a little bit off in comparison to the other kids. I mean, the spoiled child, the lazy TV watcher, the glutton, and the gum chewer? The 2005 movie, on the other hand, gave us a different bratty stereotype that was not only equal to the other bratty stereotypes, but also more relevant to an actual child-rearing problem. Mike TV is also more relevant, with his brattiness more along the lines of a desensitization in the world around him, which you definitely see in a lot of kids these days. Oddly enough, it's Veruca who doesn't seem nearly as bratty as the other kids, but maybe that's just because I'm comparing her to the brattiness that is the 1971 Veruca. Anyway you look at it though, both movies had a really great supporting cast of characters, and they both easily beat out the book. And now, the imagination of Roald Dahl, the imagination of Mel Stewart, and the imagination of Tim Burton. To me, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is something straight out of a child's imagination of what a chocolate factory should be. In reality, we know that a chocolate factory would be much more boring than Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. Chocolate rivers, fudge mountains, squirrels working in the nut room, I mean, this is what a child would imagine a chocolate factory to look like. This was Roald Dahl's chance to really let his imagination get away from him, and by golly, is it fun to read. How did the two movies do? Well, in both cases pretty well, but in both cases for different reasons. They both managed to find the whimsy in Roald Dahl's writing, but they both captured it in different ways. The 1971 film portrayed the Chocolate Factory as kind of a scary funhouse in a lot of ways, where you're never quite sure of your perception of reality, and at times it could scare the ever-loving you-know-what out of you. No. Inappropriate editing, Matt! Sorry, couldn't resist. But at the same time, they let imagination run wild, especially with the chocolate room, the inventing room, and a number of other rooms. And there was an authenticity to the setting. For the most part, the machinery was functional, and it did really look like a factory. The 2005 movie focused more on the boundless imagination, and the factory looks zany and insane, like it was built by a nutcase like Johnny Depp's Wonka. That's not to say that there weren't some problems with both imageries. Most of the problems problems with the 1971 movie mostly have to do with the time period and the budget. Parts of it have a very 70s feel to it, especially during the Oompa Loompa songs. And like Editing Matt already pointed out, the Chocolate River. There's also that scene in the tunnel with all the really freaky, weird imagery. I mean, I know that scene was a little creepy in the book as well, but I don't know whose acid trip this was. The 2005 movie definitely captured the zaniness of the factory, and there's a lot more creativity with it. And I realize that a lot of it is not, as I previously implied, computer generated, but it still doesn't feel quite real to me. I just don't feel like the characters are really looking at what they're supposed to be looking at. And the darkness of the imagery is still off-putting. This is supposed to be a whimsical and childlike story, and yet so many of the scenes seem dark and sinister for no particular reason. I mean, I guess that's just Tim Burton, but really? Couldn't he have toned it down? I guess the main thing about both movies' imagery is that they both managed to capture the tone of the story they were trying to tell, and they definitely captured the personality of the Wonka who was in charge of the chocolate factory. But I stand by what I said before. This is supposed to be a world of pure imagination, and the imagination of the movies is somewhat limited by the technology, whereas the imagination of the book is not. And finally, the story. This is, in the end, a pretty basic story. When it comes right down to it, it's basically a showcase for Roald Dahl's imagination, as well as a nice moral tale about how to be a good kid. Roald Dahl's definition of how to be a good kid is pretty basic. Don't be a jerk. He gives some great examples of bad children, so we know a lot of the things that good children are not supposed to do. Don't eat too much, don't be a spoiled brat, don't chew gum incessantly, for the love of God, don't watch television. Yeah, Roald Dahl was pretty passionate about this particular point. I'm pretty sure that that particular Oompa Loompa song was the longest, and it definitely used the strongest language. It's basically a rant in rhyming couplets. No small feat. And I kind of feel the same way about this song as I do about Tim Burton's imagery. Could you tone it down? The 1971 movie has pretty much the same message, but with a little bit more meat to it, thanks to the Slugworth subplot. 1971 Charlie is actually tempted to steal from Wonka, whereas Book Charlie is never tested in such a way, so we don't really know what he would do in a similar situation. 2005 movie doesn't get tested this way either, though given the fact that he would do pretty much anything for his family, he probably would have stolen the gobstopper in a heartbeat. But then, Charlie isn't the pivotal character in the 2005 movie, Wonka is. And let me be perfectly clear about this. I don't have a problem with that. I think it's fascinating to delve into Wonka's backstory. The problem with this is, as we talked about before, I can't take this Wonka seriously. He's basically a nutcase, and not in the same mad genius sort of way that Gene Wilder or Book Wonka are. He's legitimately out of his freaking mind. The kindest explanation for his behavior is that he never really grew up, and I guess the ultimate message of the movie is that you need to? I don't know, it's really confused, almost as confused as Depp's characterization of Wonka. I think this film had a lot of potential, but as far as I'm concerned, they didn't live up to it, and I think it's because they were trying so hard not to be the Gene Wilder version of this movie. I mean, the claim was that this movie is based closer to the book and not on the 1971 film, but really it deviates about as much, and I really do think they were trying so hard not to be the other movie. And maybe I am a little bit biased towards my childhood favorite, but I really do think it's the best telling of the story. The book still tells a decent story, but when you really look at it, there's not a whole lot to it. The 1971 movie has a stronger message, it's more rooted in reality, and it's a great movie for kids as well as adults. And the 2005 movie, I really don't know. I think they just need a clear direction. So as before, the book is still better than the more recent movie, but the original movie is still better than the book. And that does it for our second Books vs. Movies Review Redux. Stay tuned tomorrow for our third and final Books vs. Movies Review Redux. In this one, we'll be turning a 5-round review into a 7-round review. Until next time, take care.